What I've done now is I've used masking tape to protect the parts of the car that I don't want damaged from the resin, and I've put mold release wax over all of it so none of it will stick. Two layers of fiberglass mat were put on here, and that's got to cure. Tomorrow what I've got to do is figure out how I'm going to bolt it on. I already know, but there's no point trying to getting into a long discussion here. And the other side is the same. These should stay on for about 2 or 3 days to make sure that they don't twist and they're properly cured. And then I'll trim them and continue on with the process. I've put 2 layers of glass mat on here, so now they're curing overnight, and then the next step will be to do the mounting and put the mounting brackets in and put some fiberglass over that to hold them in place. And they've got to have to stay on the car for 2 or 3 days to cure. Sometimes when you try to pull them off too soon, you can put a twist in them and they won't fit right. 2 coats of mat were put on, and resin. Of course, this is the next day. And what I'm doing now is laying out for a metal panel with some fasteners that's going to hold this block on the car once I separate it off. Obviously it's got to be remounted, so that's how it's going to be done. What you're looking at now is the mounting plate. Been positioned and the holes have been drilled through the body. That's going to get fiberglassed in, and the threads will get covered up with some tape so that they don't get resin contamination on them. And afterwards, once the bolts will have to be removed to remove this section from the car. In this little area here, this fairing, I'm going to call it, what I've got is a small little radiator, power steering radiator, and what I'm going to do is make a duct and a scoop that's going to grab the air and drive it down. Now, there's probably a half a dozen different ways we can configure this, but one of the things that I always try to take into consideration is when the car is not moving. So if that rad's warm, I want convection to raise the air up through the scoop so it's still doing something. And then once the car is moving forward, the air is going to get drawn in, goes down through the duct, and these hoses are going to go out. This fitting is a little bit tight. I might be able to swoop it over there. I'm going to see how it works out. If it doesn't work out the way I want, I'll see if I can find a 90-degree there. This is the tubes are copper, so I can unsweat this one and put another one in and do a little bit of painting on it. But that's the general idea. So now I've got to make the duct that's going to grab the air down to this piece here and make it out of fiberglass it in, and get it prepared. What I'm going to make the duct from is this piece of florist foam. What I found is it's very dense. It's easy to sand and form. I can coat it with some wax so that it will release, and it's resistant to fiberglass polyester resin. There are solvents that will attack it, and that's one of the methods that you use to remove it once the part has been made. So it's kind of like a lost foam, but you're not using heat to extract it. You'll be using a solvent. One of the nice things with this florist foam is that apart from being easy to sand, if you make a mistake, all you end up doing is you take a piece of another piece of it and some hot melt glue, and you stick it back on and you keep sanding and away you go. So this block here cost me $15 Canadian, but it saves me a lot of time. The other foams are too light, not dense enough, and the styrene foam, when the resin hits it, it'll burn away, so you're going to lose the shape. Now that the fiberglass is set up, it's been on here for about 4 or 5 days. It's rather stiff. I've removed the blocking, and it literally, because of the release coat, the wood just fell away from it. Next step is to undo the bolts which are holding it to the car, and I'll take this down and we're going to trim it and fit that foam duct in here to see if it's going to work out the way I want it to. So I have my 2 patterns here that basically I'm just going to, they've been waxed with paraffin and a little bit of mold release wax. And now I'm going to mix up some resin and put a thin layer of cloth, maybe one or two. And all this is a form to allow the air to go through, and the foam is sacrificial. I pour a solvent in it afterward. It's going to dissolve it out, and I'll be left with a cavity, and this duct will be then cemented or fiberglassed into the shells that are on the car. I've removed the parts from the car. As you can see, they still have to be trimmed, and I've cleaned all the tape. There's a little bit of tape on the back that got stuck when it pulled off, but apart from that, looks pretty good. So a little bit of trimming, and on to the next step again. Now what I've done is I've taken the foam outside of the spacer here. I've also cut a hole for the little radiator to go in. This block here was kept in just to make sure the foam didn't expand and change the internal dimension. You can see how the chute is, or the airway that's going to come in. And what I'm going to do afterwards is turn this on its side, fill that with foam, clean it off, and then glass it and wrap it around. So it'll take a little bit of time yet, but it's progressing nicely. A lot of labor. So I filled in the rest of this one. First off, I position the vent, the tubing, and then I secure it with foam and a clamp until that cures overnight. And then once that's done, I just make sure that it's still going to be fine for the little radiator to go in. And then what's happened here is I've filled it all in with foam. Probably going to need a little bit more. I'm going to trim it. It's got to go overnight. I ran out of foam. One can wasn't enough. I'm going to trim it, and then once it gets trimmed, locate the scoop, then I'll cut a hole with a hole saw into the vent, into the tube, and I'm going to make a scoop on the outside. That'll be placed, and then the cloth will go over top of that. So I've already started trimming this, and you can just see I'm using a bread knife going down, trimming out the high stuff. Got to trim it at least back to the fiberglass, because you know it can't be wider than that. Same thing on this side. And should be getting close to putting in the hole for the vent, putting the scoop on it, and then next to fiberglass. What I've done here now is I've just skim coated the foam. Here's the foam, what it looks. It's kind of porous, so I've got a couple choices. I could put a little bit extra foam in here and wait another day, or I just kind of wanting to get on with this. So what I'm going to do here is I put a little bit of body filler in there. I'm going to fill in some of the holes, give it a little bit of a shaping, see where we're at, and smooth it out a bit before I start laying some fiberglass cloth on top of it. That's the first coat, and I've used a surf form, one of these little hand planing blocks to knock off the high spots. So I'm going to give it another coat and get it closer, and keep working at it until I get the shape I want, and then it's ready for the first coat of glass. There's been 3 skim coats of Bondo put on, and right now they're fairly hard. If you're going to be used just as a filler block, what I could do is just spray the rubber guard over top of it and mount them to the car. Without putting any fiberglass on this, which I've done on my other car, they'll last for about 20 years before they'll crack. So then what you have to do is gouge it out, put some Bondo in there, and sand it and put more rubber guard on it. But apart from that, I'm going to get set up now. I'm going to put one coat of cloth on it just to reinforce it before I make the cuts for the vents and the small scoops that I'm going to put on. I've laid out on the outside where the internal vent is, and if you remember, you can see how I made the internal vent. The first coat of glass is dried. Now I'm going to make up a scoop that's going to go over top of this, cut it in, and then glass it on one more time, and it'll be ready then afterwards for final coat of finish and the assembly to install the small rads. This is the scoop. As you can see, it's a piece of cardboard. The intent here is the air is going to grab this and go in, and I'm going to put a little bit of glass maybe over the back here of it and bed this in with some Bondo to set it. I'm going to make it out of stainless. So this is the shape it's going to have, and what I made the pattern from, as you can see, it's made from a pizza box. So anything just handy to get the shape, and then I'll transfer this shape, flatten it back out onto some stainless steel. I'll cut that out and get that ready to be fitted. This is the stainless steel scoop I've now made up. I've hemmed this, which means I've taken it as too long, folded it over and crimped it down so it doesn't have a sharp edge, gives it a little bit more resilience. What I'm going to do next is take some Bondo, put it in the slot, push this in, fill it in, put a clamp on it until it cures, and that'll be it. Well, then one more coat of glass has to go on after this gets sanded down, and that will be it. The glass will not go on here, just the textured finish will go on that. So currently I've finished the fiberglass work. I've just test fitted the little radiator with the hoses that come out the one end here, and that should work very nicely. The air is going to come in, blow down through here, and the other consideration is when you're sitting in traffic, convection causes the heat to go up and it vents out the top. So it works both ways, but this should work very nicely. So the filler blocks have been installed now, and next step is to put those little radiators in there and pipe them into the intercooler circuit, and that should be the upgrade for the intercooler radiator completed. Got all the plumbing done. The filler blocks are in. Little rads are purged inside of it, so that gives you an idea of what I've done. Just add a little more cooling to the intercooler circuit, and I'll just take a quick shot of my other car with the filler blocks on it that were put in many years ago, and they have air ducts. Actually, the defroster duct was put in, and that goes to the back side of the disc plates and blows air on it as you drive down the road. It cools rotors off a little bit. This is on my 79. It's dark out and I've got a couple of little lights, but you can probably see the ducting in there. It's just a piece of defroster duct. Again, I did these back probably 30 years ago. Same method, only difference being is the front is just skimmed with Bondo, sanded, and covered with rubber guard. And maybe I got 20 years out of it before they cracked and I had to do some work on it. But I think it finishes the car off a little better. That's the way I've liked it. And most people don't even notice them when I'm at Freakout that I have them on there.